Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
We've got a really interesting stack of source material today, actually sent in by one of you listening. It's a daily digest, basically. Top headlines from India, dated June 15th, 2025.
That's right. And our goal here, our mission for this deep dive is really to, cut through the noise. We want to pull out the key bits, the important details from these headlines.
Yeah, and figure out why they actually matter.
Exactly. Understand the significance behind them.
So think of this as, like, your quick briefing. We're aiming to get you properly informed on some pretty significant events. We've got sports, politics, diplomacy.
Even a major infrastructure project and, unfortunately, a disaster response. It really covers a lot of ground.
It does. So we'll walk you through each headline, elaborate using the details we have from the source material, and hopefully give you those essential nuggets of information without you having to sift through everything yourself.
It's all about getting to the core of what happened, using the specifics from the sources provided, and exploring, what it all means in the bigger picture.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Let's unpack this. We're kicking things off with some really big news from the world of cricket. And interestingly, we have two quite different cricket headlines today.
We do, one on the international stage and one looking at the powerhouse that is domestic cricket in India.
Right. So the first one, this is from the World Test Championship final.
Yeah, and the headline is pretty clear. South Africa won. They are the new World Test champions.
Big result. And who did they beat? Only the defending champions, Australia.
That's it. The source confirms the victory was by 5 wickets. And the venue, the iconic Lord's Cricket Ground in London.
5 wickets. Sounds like it was still pretty competitive right to the end. But here's a detail from the source that just jumps out. This win is South Africa's first major cricket title in, wait for it, 27 years.
27 years. Yeah, that's a really long time in sport. Think about the generations of players, the near misses. It's a massive moment for them, breaking that drought.
Absolutely. And on such a big stage, at Lord's. So how did they do it? The source mentions the chase.
Yes, they successfully chased down a target in the 4th innings. 282 runs.
Now, 282, okay, that sounds achievable maybe in like a one-day game. But the source gives really important context for force in Test cricket. It says 282 is the second highest successful run chase in the entire 141-year Test history of Lord's.
Wow. Okay, that context changes everything. That tells you this wasn't just winning, this was making history at the home of cricket. A seriously impressive feat.
So how did that final day unfold? The source gives us a bit of a breakdown. They started day 4, resuming at 213 for 2.
Right, so in a pretty strong position, you'd say, needing only 69 more runs with 8 wickets still in the bag.
And they showed some real composure, didn't they? Lost only 3 more wickets getting those runs.
Yeah.
Suggests they handled the final day pressure really well.
It certainly seems that way, though the Aussies, well, they didn't just roll over. The source mentions they fought hard. They actually used up all 3 of their DRS reviews pretty quickly within the first 90 minutes of play on that final day.
Desperate measures, maybe. Trying everything to get a breakthrough.
Exactly. Shows they were throwing everything at it, trying to unsettle the South Africans.
But the key figure, according to the source, the anchor for South Africa, was Aiden Markram. He was already set, starting the day on 102 not out.
And he just carried on. Built that score up to 136 before he finally got out. Interestingly, just short of the finish line. Got out when they only needed 6 more runs.
Shame he couldn't hit the winning runs, but what a contribution. The source points out he batted for over 6 hours.
6 hours! That's proper test match batting, isn't it? Patience, resilience, especially against a quality Australian attack who would have been coming hard at him. That really set the foundation.
Definitely. And the winning moment itself. The source says Kyle Varane hit the winning run. A drive into the covers.
You can just picture it, can't you? The ball going through, the celebration starting at Lord's.
Yeah.
Relief and elation for the South African team and fans.
Seal the victory. And for Australia, the source notes, it means they couldn't hold on to that WTC mace, handing it over.
So let's step back. What's the bigger picture here? This wasn't just another test match win. It's genuinely historic for South Africa, ending that 27-year wait for a major trophy.
Exactly. Source really emphasizes that this shows South Africa can perform under huge pressure on the biggest stage. It's a landmark moment, really highlighting their progress, especially in Test cricket.
So for you listening, think about this. It's more than just a score. It's a story about perseverance, a record chase at a historic ground, breaking a decades-long sort of jinx. It really shows how sport can capture national hopes and deliver these incredibly significant moments.
Absolutely. Okay, moving from that global test final, let's switch focus to the juggernaut that is the Indian Premier League. Our next headline concerns the IPL final.
Right, and this one is all about scale, massive scale, specifically in terms of viewership numbers for the 2025 final.
Which final, exactly? The source says it was the 2025 IPL Championship match.
And the teams involved were Royal Challengers Bengaluru RCB versus Punjab Kings PBKS.
And the headline number is just staggering. A new viewership record. Reportedly 169 million people watched this final.
169 million. And that number becomes even more impressive when you see the comparison the source provides. It actually surpassed the previous record for any cricket match viewership, which was that huge India versus Pakistan clash in the 2021 T20 World Cup.
Right.
That had 166 million.
Wow. Beating India-Pakistan, that's usually the absolute peak. For an IPL final to top that, it's massive. Speaks volumes about the league's reach.
It really does. And there was a huge story within the match itself. The source confirms RCB won. And this was their first ever IPL title.
Finally, after all these years,
Yeah.
RCB fans have been waiting a long, long time for this.
They have. The source says the match itself, played on June 3rd in Ahmedabad at the Narendra Modi Stadium, was a nail-biter. A thrilling 6-run win for RCB.
6 runs. That's incredibly close for a final. Must have been amazing television.
Absolutely. And tied into this victory is a massive personal narrative highlighted in the source. It marks the end of Virat Kohli's 18-year quest for an IPL trophy with RCB.
18 years with one team finally winning it. You can only imagine the emotion for him and the fans. He's practically synonymous with RCB.
Exactly. The source also dives into some more specific data from BAR, the ratings agency. The final got a TVR, a television rating, of 11.
Okay, is 11 high?
It's very high. The source clarifies it's the third highest TVR in IPL history, so incredibly strong engagement.
And it wasn't just the peak viewership, right? The source mentions total watch time, too.
Yeah, this is interesting. The total watch time for this IPL final actually surpassed the watch time for another massive recent game, the 2024 T20 World Cup final between India and South Africa.
Really?
Yes. The IPL final clocked 15 billion minutes of watch time compared to 14.2 billion for that World Cup final. So people weren't just tuning in for the end, they were watching for longer periods. Deep engagement.
And the source adds another interesting little wrinkle. This huge viewership happened, even though the final was played on a weekday.
Right. Usually you expect bigger numbers on weekends, so achieving this on a weekday just underlines the event's massive pulling power.
The source also mentions the context of the season wasn't entirely smooth sailing.
No, it mentions there were significant challenges, disruptions because of an armed conflict between India and Pakistan.
Which led to match cancellations earlier in the tournament.
Precisely. So the fact that the tournament navigated those major external problems, those logistical nightmares, and still concluded with this historic viewership and a first-time winner, it's quite remarkable.
And the source names Virat Kohli and Rajat Patidar as being key players in that final victory for RCB.
So looking at the bigger picture, what does this all mean? Well, this unprecedented viewership really hammers home the incredible and still growing popularity of franchise cricket. It's a global phenomenon now.
It confirms the IPL final isn't just a domestic event. It's up there with, and in this case exceeding, major international fixtures in terms of audience engagement.
Absolutely. And for RCB, this win finally cements their legacy. They're no longer just the popular team that couldn't win, they're champions. And it undeniably underscores Virat Kohli's massive, enduring influence on Indian cricket and his connection with the audience.
So for you listening, this story isn't just about a cricket score. It highlights the sheer scale of the sports business today, its ability to overcome huge external challenges, and the power of a personal triumph narrative for a global superstar. It really shows the immense cultural and economic footprint of the IPL.
Okay, let's shift gears now. We're moving from the fields of sport to the, well, sometimes complex interplay of politics, law, and freedom of expression. Our next headline involves a well-known comedian.
Right, this is about Kunal Kamra. The headline says he's facing breach of privilege proceedings. This is in the Maharashtra Legislative Council.
And the reason for this, according to the source material, is a parody song he created. Apparently, it referenced the Deputy Chief Minister of Maharashtra, Eknath Shinde.
Okay, so it's his creative work, a song targeting a top politician, that's triggered this legislative action. The source mentions the motion for these proceedings actually started back in March, initiated by a BJP MLC, Praveen Direkar.
And the latest update, the current status, is that this motion has been formally admitted by the council chairperson, Ram Shinde. Now that it's admitted, it's been officially referred to the Council's Privilege Committee.
Right, the Privilege Committee. So what happens next? What's their role here, based on the source?
Their job is basically to look into the complaint, review the song or whatever the specific issue is, and then decide if there's enough substance to actually issue a formal notice to Kunal Kamra asking him to respond or appear.
And is there any timeline mentioned?
The source cites officials who suggest the committee plans to meet fairly soon, likely before the monsoon session of the legislature begins, which is set for June 30th.
So potentially a notice could go out to Kamra sometime early next month.
That seems to be the indication, yes, after the committee reviews it.
Now, Kamra himself hasn't been silent on this. The source mentions he responded on X, formerly Twitter.
Yes, he posted something quite pointed. The real breach of trust is letting people die in public transport every day.
That's quite a statement. The source notes this highlights his perspective, framing the proceedings against him as perhaps misplaced priorities compared to, say, issues of public safety or governance failures he's often critical of.
It definitely positions it within his broader critique of the establishment. The source also tells us who chairs this privilege committee. It's another BJP MLC, Prasad Lad.
Okay. But the committee itself hasn't commented on this specific case yet.
No, not according to the source. They haven't made any public statements about the Kamra matter at this stage.
So fundamentally, what's at stake here? This case seems to touch on that classic tension, doesn't it? Between freedom of speech and what's called parliamentary privilege.
Exactly. Parliamentary privilege is designed to protect lawmakers, allowing them to do their jobs without fear of, say, defamation suits for things said in the legislature. But using it to respond to criticism or satire happening outside the legislature, well, that raises questions. Where's the line? Especially when it involves satire aimed at senior political figures. Kamra's song seems to be right at that intersection.
And the source suggests this specific case could be quite impactful.
Yes, the analysis in the source material suggests it really forces a look at the boundaries of political satire in India. How far can it go, especially when targeting powerful politicians, and what's the appropriate response from a legislative body?
And because it involves these specific legislative privilege laws in Maharashtra, the outcome could set a precedent.
That's what the source indicates. It could influence how similar cases involving satire and political commentary directed at legislators are handled under Maharashtra's privilege laws in the future.
And for Kunal Kamra himself, what are the potential consequences if the committee finds against him?
The source says if he's found guilty of breaching privilege, he could face penalties.
But it doesn't specify what those might be.
No, the source doesn't detail the potential penalties. It just notes that consequences are possible.
So this whole situation really exemplifies that ongoing tension, in India's democracy. The push and pull between artistic or critical expression, especially when it challenges authority, and the protections and dignity that political institutions claim for themselves.
Absolutely. So for you listening, this case is a real-world example of how societies try to balance these fundamental rights and protections. How much freedom should satire have versus the need to protect legislative functions? It's not just theory. It's playing out right now in this specific legal and political context in Maharashtra.
Okay, let's shift focus again, moving into the realm of international diplomacy. This next headline involves the U.S., India, and Pakistan.
Right. This is about a specific statement, or rather a denial, issued by the White House. It concerns Pakistan's Army Chief, General Asim Munir. The White House has denied reports that he was invited to a major U.S. military parade.
Which parade was this?
The 250th anniversary parade of the U.S. Armed Forces. So, a pretty significant event.
Okay, so reports were circulating suggesting General Munir got an invitation to this big U.S. event, and the White House came out and said, nope, that's not true.
Exactly. The source says the denial was specifically aimed at stopping that speculation. And the reason this denial makes headlines is because the rumor of the invitation had already caused quite a stir, specifically a backlash in India.
Ah, okay. That's the key connection. Why would a rumored U.S. invite to Pakistan's army chief cause concern in India?
Well, the source explains that before the denial came out, many political analysts in India saw this supposed invitation as a kind of diplomatic setback for India.
A setback? How so?
The source even quotes Derek Grossman from the Rand Corporation, who apparently called the perceived invitation a snub to India. And it also mentions that Indian opposition figures were raising concerns, questioning the direction of U.S.-Pakistan relations, maybe fearing a warming trend.
And General Munir himself. The source describes him as a controversial figure in Indian discourse.
Yes, and it links this partly to his public statements, particularly reinforcing Pakistan's stance on Kashmir. Obviously, Kashmir is an incredibly sensitive issue, a core dispute between India and Pakistan, so his position makes him a focal point in India.
Interestingly, the source also points out there's internal dissent within Pakistan regarding Munir.
That's right. Pakistan's Tehreek-e-Insaf Party, PTI, apparently announced plans for a protest in Washington, D.C.
Protesting against Munir in the U.S.
Yeah, the protest goal, according to the source, is to condemn his leadership and also demand free elections in Pakistan. So it adds this layer of internal Pakistani politics to any international engagement involving him.
What about the U.S. perspective? Does the source offer anything there?
It does. It mentions comments from the head of U.S. Central Command, General Michael Kurilla. He apparently praised Pakistan's counterterrorism efforts
Okay.
and specifically credited General Munir for helping with the capture of some ISIS Khorasan operatives. This suggests there's still, ongoing operational cooperation happening on some levels.
But Kurilla also repeated that standard U.S. line, didn't he? About relations with India and Pakistan not being mutually exclusive.
Yes, he did. That's the classic diplomatic framing the U.S. uses, trying to reassure both sides that strengthening ties with one doesn't necessarily mean weakening ties with the other. It's that strategic balancing act they try to maintain in South Asia.
So what's the takeaway from the White House denial then?
The source suggests it probably means that any interactions the U.S. might have with General Munir, despite maybe some other speculation about Pentagon meetings, are likely to be kept fairly low profile now. The big public gesture of a parade invite is off the table.
And meanwhile, the U.S. is also reaffirming ties with India.
Yes, the source notes U.S. officials have been emphasizing strategic cooperation with India, talking about counterterrorism collaboration, shared democratic values, seemingly trying to manage the narrative and reassure Delhi after the ripple effects of that initial rumor.
This whole episode really highlights that tricky position the U.S. is in, doesn't it? Trying to juggle relationships with both India and Pakistan.
Absolutely. The source points out how difficult it is because regional sensitivities, especially between India and Pakistan, are just so high. Any move, or even just a rumored move, by the U.S. can get intensely analyzed and trigger strong reactions, highlighting those deep-seated tensions.
So for you listening, this story is a great illustration of that complex diplomatic dance major powers perform. It shows how perceptions, even based on potentially false reports, can have real consequences and reveal the underlying friction points between nations. It's a reminder of how much perception matters in international relations.
Okay, let's transition now to focus on something more domestic within India.
Yep.
National development and large-scale infrastructure. Our next headline deals with a major energy project.
All right, this is about the Gorakhpur Haryana Anavidyut Pariyojana, which is a nuclear power project. The headline says it just had a high-level review.
And the review involved top figures. The Union Power Minister, Manohar Lal, and also Haryana's Chief Minister, Nayab Singh Saini. The project itself is located in Fatabad, Haryana.
And who's building it?
It's being executed by the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, NPCIL. They fall under the Department of Atomic Energy, so it's a major government undertaking, part of India's official nuclear program.
And it sounds like a big one. The scope is described as 4 700-milliway pressurized heavy water reactors, PHWRs.
Yeah, 700 milliway per reactor is significant capacity. 4 of them together makes this a very large power station. PHWRs are a reactor type India has a lot of experience with.
What's the expected impact specifically for Haryana where it's located?
The source says it will significantly boost Haryana's overall energy capacity, a major addition to their grid.
And there's a direct benefit mentioned too, right? Something about electricity allocation.
Yes, a key point. 50%, half of all the electricity generated by this entire project, is specifically allocated to Haryana state. That's a huge direct input into meeting Haryana's own power needs.
This clearly fits into a bigger national picture, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The source explicitly links it to India's broader push for developing nuclear energy, the goal being to increase sustainable and reliable power generation nationally as the country grows.
And the fact that both the union minister and the state CM were involved in the review, that signals it's a high-priority project.
Definitely. It underscores the government's commitment to getting these large, complex projects built efficiently and on time.
What about benefits beyond just electricity? Does the source mention anything else?
It suggests the project is expected to contribute significantly to economic and industrial growth in the region.
How so? By providing reliable power.
Exactly. Stable, large-scale power helps address supply concerns, which can attract industry, support existing businesses, and generally foster development in the area. For residents, too, reliable power is crucial.
The source seems to emphasize the importance of nuclear power for India's future.
Yes, it describes nuclear energy as playing a pivotal role in India's future energy mix.
So getting this Gorakhpur project up and running successfully would be seen as a major win for the country's energy sector.
A significant achievement, yes, especially as India aims to diversify its energy sources and increase its clean energy capacity.
And it also positions Haryana quite prominently in India's nuclear plans.
It does. It highlights Haryana's growing role as a key state in the country's nuclear energy roadmap. Hosting such a large facility brings long-term benefits.
Stable power for industries, residents.
Exactly. The source mentions the review meeting itself focused on the practicalities of strategic planning, hitting operational milestones, suggesting a real push to keep the project on schedule.
So the overall message here seems to be about India's dedication to clean energy, building sustainable power, and doing it efficiently.
That's the takeaway. So for you listening, think about the tangible effects of huge projects like this. They impact energy supply directly, potentially lowering costs or increasing reliability. They can spur economic development. And they play a part in national environmental strategies. This review highlights the government focus needed to turn these complex plans into reality, affecting potentially the power grid and industrial prospects where you might live or work.
Okay, another complete shift now. Our next headline takes us into a sensitive area involving culture, religion, tradition, and national initiatives.
Yes, this concerns a joint India-Nepal mountaineering expedition, and it's apparently sparked quite a bit of controversy, specifically within the state of Sikkim.
What did the expedition do that caused the problem?
They climbed Kanchenjunga, reached the summit.
Okay, but why is that controversial?
Because, according to the source, doing so defied deeply ingrained local religious customs in Sikkim.
Which communities are reacting?
The source mentions Sikkim's Bhutia and Lepcha communities specifically. They are reportedly outraged.
And why the outrage? What's their connection to the mountain?
They consider Kanchenjunga sacred. It's revered as their guardian deity. So for them, climbing to the absolute peak is seen as a serious violation, a desecration.
I see. So what are they demanding now?
The source says local leaders want two main things. First, a purification ritual to be performed on the mountain, and second, formal apologies from both the central Indian government and the Sikkim state government. They feel both bear some responsibility.
What was the purpose of this expedition in the first place? The source mentions it was part of a national initiative.
Yes, it was part of India's Harshihar Tiranga initiative. The goal of that program is apparently to hoist the Indian national flag on the highest peak in every Indian state. It's framed as a sort of nationalistic, patriotic endeavor.
But this clash with local rules.
Directly, the source is clear. Sikkim officially prohibits climbing Kanchenjunga precisely because it's considered sacred.
So how did the expedition climb it then?
They apparently approached the mountain and made the summit attempt from the Nepal side, where maybe those specific Sikkimese prohibitions don't apply legally, but that distinction doesn't matter to the locals.
Not according to the source. They argue that, regardless of the route, reaching the summit itself violated the sanctity of their sacred peak. The summit is the summit. This sounds like it's become political, too.
Very much so. Sikkim's chief minister, Prem Singh Tamang, reportedly wrote a letter about it to India's home minister. And what did the letter say?
It condemned the climb strongly, calling it a violation of religious beliefs and legal provisions. So, hitting both the spiritual and the regulatory aspects. Are people seeing this as part of a bigger trend?
Some critics, according to the source, view it symbolically. They see it as maybe reflecting a trend of growing centralization in India, and potentially diminishing Sikkim's own unique identity and autonomy within the larger Indian nation.
That seems to be the concern raised. The source also provides really important historical context. It points out that climbers in the past have respected these local beliefs.
How so?
The famous first successful ascent of Kanchenjunga back in 1955. The climbers on that expedition deliberately stopped just short of the actual summit. They didn't step on the very top, specifically out of respect for the Sikkimese belief that the peak itself is sacred.
Wow. So there's a clear precedent of respect that was broken here.
Exactly. And this recent expedition ignoring that precedent seems to have really fueled the anger and the sense of violation.
Understandably. The source says it's escalating fears among locals that their cultural and religious heritage might get pushed aside for these kinds of nationalistic displays.
And this outrage is spreading.
Yes, intensified online. The source even mentions videos circulating of Sikkimese children pleading for the mountain not to be climbed again. Really shows the depth of feeling.
There's also a mention of local fears of, like, misfortune.
Yes, rooted in their belief system. They reportedly fear that desecrating their guardian deity could bring bad luck or disaster to the community.
And they're linking it to recent events.
The source says some locals cited a recent tragic landslide that killed 6 people, connecting it in their minds to this disturbance of the mountain. It shows how deep that spiritual connection and fear of consequences runs.
So what happens next? How might this be resolved?
Well, the source mentions that the response from the Privilege Committee, again, it doesn't specify which one, could be state or central, its response will likely be key in shaping future policies.
Policies about protecting sacred sites when they clash with national initiatives.
Exactly. How to balance respecting sacred spaces and diverse traditions against these broader national goals or activities like mountaineering. This incident really forces that issue.
So for you listening, this story is a really vivid example of that potential clash between, say, national ambition and deeply rooted local culture and religion. It raises big questions about how diverse societies respect different traditions within a single nation, and what happens when historical customs meet modern goals or nationalistic projects. It's a really complex situation.
Okay, for our final headline, we unfortunately have to turn to a tragic event and the official response that's followed. This concerns the recent Air India crash.
Yes, the headline is about India launching a high-level investigation into the Air India crash that happened in Ahmedabad.
The crash itself, the source confirms, occurred last Thursday in Ahmedabad.
And the human cost is just devastating. The source states over 270 people lost their lives.
It does, and it highlights the wider impact. The casualties included 4 students and also multiple workers who were tragically in a medical college dormitory that was hit on the ground.
Just awful. The aircraft itself was an Air India flight.
Yes, bound for London Gatwick.
And it crashed very soon after takeoff.
That's what the source indicates, shortly after departing Ahmedabad.
Given the scale of this, what's the official response been?
The government acted quite quickly. On Saturday, just 2 days after the crash, they announced the formation of an independent committee to investigate.
Independent, meaning separate from the usual aviation bodies.
Yes, the source describes it that way. And its composition includes officials from both the government and the military, suggesting an effort to bring in broad expertise and perhaps ensure impartiality.
Is there a timeline for this investigation?
Yes, the committee was scheduled to hold its first session very quickly on the Monday following the announcement, and they've been given a deadline.
A 3-month deadline to submit their full report, which suggests they want answers relatively quickly while still aiming for a thorough job.
The source also touches on the immediate aftermath. Eyewitness accounts describing harrowing scenes at the site.
And the impact on the ground was significant, especially at that dormitory.
Yes, the detail about students being there having lunch when the impact occurred really brings home the tragic randomness and the scale of the loss beyond those on the plane.
What about survivors from the flight itself?
Tragically, the source states only 1 survivor has been confirmed from the 242 people who were on board.
Just one. That really underscores the catastrophic nature of the crash.
It absolutely does. So what will the investigation focus on? The source expects it to look at several key areas.
Like potential mechanical failures.
Yes, that's one. Also, the actions and decisions of the pilots in the cockpit leading up to the event.
And communications.
Air traffic control communications will be crucial, trying to reconstruct that timeline and identify any contributing factors from that side.
As you'd expect, there's bound to be immense public pressure now.
Yes, the source notes mounting pressure on the authorities for transparency throughout the investigation and ultimately for accountability regarding the causes.
Has this tragedy sparked wider discussions?
Predictably, yes. It's reignited debates across India about aviation safety standards.
Focusing on specific areas.
The source mentions particular focus on emergency protocols and also aircraft maintenance practices within India's aviation sector. People are asking questions.
And the findings of this committee could lead to real changes.
That's the hope or the potential outcome suggested by the source. The committee's findings and recommendations could potentially lead to policy reforms aimed at preventing similar accidents in the future.
Meanwhile, the families of the victims, they must be desperate for answers.
Understandably. The source says they're demanding swift answers. And the government, in turn, is trying to reassure everyone that a thorough, high-level investigation is underway.
So the next few months are critical.
Absolutely. Crucial for finding the cause of this specific crash, but also for evaluating India's overall aviation safety framework in light of this terrible event.
So for you listening, air safety affects so many of us. This awful tragedy and the investigation following it is a stark reminder of just how critical rigorous safety standards, maintenance, and emergency planning are in complex systems like aviation. It really underscores the vital need for oversight and accountability when so many lives are at stake.
Wow, we've really covered a huge amount of ground in this deep dive today. Quite a range.
We really have. We've gone from, the highs of global sporting victories in cricket all the way through complex political and legal issues, international diplomatic maneuvers, ambitious national infrastructure.
Then that deeply sensitive clash over cultural and religious beliefs on Kanchenjunga, and ending with the tragic reality of that plane crash and the investigation.
Taken together, these headlines, though they seem quite separate, they do offer a fascinating snapshot of India at this particular moment, June 15th, 2025. They highlight not just the events, but also these deeper currents running underneath.
Yeah, themes like national pride, the power of tradition and cultural values, political dynamics, global relationships, technological ambition, and of course that fundamental need for safety and accountability.
And what really stands out, looking across all of them, is how often these big forces intersect. Sometimes it leads to progress or celebration, like the cricket wins or the potential of the energy project, but other times they clash quite dramatically.
Like the Kanchenjunga controversy or the Kamra proceedings, or they reveal vulnerabilities, like the air crash investigation highlights. It seems the very act of pursuing big goals in sport, infrastructure, national initiatives can sometimes bring underlying tensions or risks right to the surface.
That's a really interesting point, which leads us to maybe a final thought, a question for you to mull over based on everything we've discussed from these sources.
Yeah, how does a society, especially one as incredibly diverse and complex as India, effectively navigate that friction? The friction that inevitably arises when big national goals or modern ambitions run up against deeply held local beliefs or delicate political situations, or just the inherent risks that come with complex technologies and systems like aviation.
It's a constant challenge, isn't it? Finding that balance. Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.